Welcome to Fluency Jams, where your hosts, Steve and Aaron, gather notes from the real world of business and tech. We're talking with leaders and innovators who are making a difference, searching for stories that inspire, challenge, and educate. You're about to enter a dimension, not only of ideas, but of innovation, a journey where no podcast has gone before.
Welcome back to Fluency Jams. We're here today with a very special guest, Kris Jennings. Kris Jennings recently published a very thought-provoking book called Inspired by Fear. I'm going to hand it over to Steve.
Thanks, Aaron. Aaron is co-founder of Fluency Digital and VP of Business Development for Bring Me the News. I'm thrilled to introduce Kris, who I consider a friend and someone whose career I greatly admire. Kris spent 17 years in the corporate trenches at companies like Cargill and Wells Fargo, experiencing firsthand the challenges of big organizational shifts. What's truly unique is how she channeled her transformation into a career of helping leaders navigate big, complex changes. In her new book, Inspired by Fear, she challenges us to think and feel differently about change leadership. Very warm welcome to Kris Jennings. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, you guys. I'm glad to be here.
Seems like it'd be an understatement to say that we're in a time of great change right now. I guess the first question is, your journey started with personal change that shaped your career. Can you share how uncertainty influenced your transition into consulting?
I'm happy to share a little bit about my journey. So to your point, Aaron, it's about that transition I made when I got laid off from a company that had never done big layouts and found myself in the world of solopreneuring. And that was in 2012. So, all this 13 years later, it seems like now it's old hat to be on my own and being my own boss. Didn't expect it, had to adjust quickly, and I've never really looked back just in terms of how much joy I find now in designing my days and doing the work with organizations that I love. And then usually after a year or so, I move on to a new one. It's been a joy to make that transition from full-time employment to solopreneuring.
Congratulations on that, Kris. For listeners who might not be familiar with the field, what exactly is change management and can change really be managed?
So I tend to think of it as change is the big umbrella. And on the task management side, we've got change management. So for those of you who are familiar with project plans, Gantt charts, big technology changes, which have only expanded over the last 20 years or so in most organizations, that's the change management side. That's being able to identify the things that we need to do to communicate and train people to help them use the new system. And on the other side is the more human side. How do you lead people through this? How do you lead the humans who have motivations, emotions, make decisions irrationally because of those emotions? That's really about the change leadership, the part that I work on, which is usually with the key leader, the key organizational champion, who is identifying how can work be better through a change. So in a nutshell, that's change both on the management side and on the leadership side.
I struggle to keep pace in a fast-changing world, and I know there's a lot of other people that do as well, especially in the face of large-scale uncertainty. Is there a form of change management tailored specifically for people?
Yeah, first of all, and Stephen, I'll be empathetic. Everyone feels a sense of change overload. I can't think of an example in my organizational consulting experience where I haven't noticed that really the organization and the people in it are completely overloaded with the amount of change, how fast things are changing, and what people are expected to adapt to. It requires a level of flexibility and resilience that most of us struggle to manage. And add things on top of that happening in our culture. So I think, if the pandemic is an example too of where the world was full of change and uncertainty, the thing that I've noticed is what comes with that amount of change is fear, and a high amount of fear, and helping people learn to notice fear in all its forms, name it, because that's really the moment in which you can shift out of being a victim of the situation to being your own hero. So for those of you who like the Star Wars trilogy, I often use you become the Luke Skywalker, right? To be able to shift into, I'm going to solve this for myself. That's a little bit about how I think about shifting out of fear and into courage.
Yeah. So in a corporate environment, and what you've been doing for a very long time, do you think about commonalities in different situations you've been in a corporate environment? What is the most common thing that people fear? There must be something that's pretty consistent.
What happens in change is that you're going from where you are to something new. And oftentimes you don't have a clear idea of what that something new is. The leader may or may not do a great job of talking about it, of describing it in vivid enough detail for people to go, oh, I get what it's going to be like to live in that new world. And then even breaking it down into what am I going to have to be successful? What do I need to know how to do in order to be successful in that new world? The fear and uncertainty of not being good at something as you're learning, of looking silly, of looking foolish, that's threatening to people. That sparks our inherent human response, which is to protect us from uncertainty and the unknown. A variety of responses, fight or flight, freeze and fawn, are the language that you might have heard.
That is interesting. Imagine coming in a change situation, you are challenged to gain the trust of people because you're coming in oftentimes as a consultant. How are you able to do that?
Yeah. And so first of all, I think it's a very human response, right? So those 4 Fs, as they're called in the fear world, those inherent responses are completely human. They're built into our biology. They're part of the way our nervous system has evolved over, I forget my stats now, 400 million years? It's about helping people understand that everyone else is having the same reactions that they are. And shifting out of that place of fear, which is really more about disconnection from others, and into a place of trust and connectedness. Once you can bring people back to that state of calm, that's when you can start problem solving, whether that's for individuals or teams. So what do you need to learn? What are your questions? What are you nervous about? That combination both of the emotion as well as the behavior, the actions that somebody might take for themselves or on behalf of their peers and teams.
It's interesting to know that we're kind of wired. I think we inherently know this because everybody's been fearful of something, but we're kind of wired like that. Some of the responses are pretty consistent from person to person.
There's definitely, if you think about the base level state, that freeze and fawn, which is their dorsal nervous system state, that is the oldest. For me, that's my most natural response, to drop into a complete shutdown mode. I choose to escape or not deal with stuff. It's learning to notice that I'm doing that and then work myself into a more connected state slowly as my nervous system can handle it. Other people jump into fight or flight. So I think in organizations, it's become culturally appropriate to be angry. Our culture, instead of responding with fear, which might reflect poorly on us, it's okay to be angry. But a lot of times it's a matter of what's masking the fear, and anger is a very common one, especially at higher levels in organizations.
Yeah. So do you feel like there's been a cultural shift over the years? You've been doing this, not that people didn't used to do it, but it seems like, is it more accepted?
I mean, I accept it, or just like part of the do productivity culture, right? Yeah. I think we can all relate to the fact that the average attention span has gone from 8 minutes down to 8 seconds.
It's a lot for me.
We're all expected to be more productive, which makes us more assertive. We shift into that fight. So that sympathetic nervous system reaction, the fight or flight, those are, I would say, almost normalized in terms of how people respond in many corporate environments of a very assertive would be respectful to both you and me. Aggressive, where it's, more to my own benefit and I'm not treating you in a connected way, and becoming angry about how we're addressing whatever the issue is in the environment. So not everyone's as calm as you guys.
I just really appreciate all your insights and sharing so much about your work with corporations. After all these years of consulting, what made you feel ready to share your story in your new book?
Yeah, and I do share some of my own personal history with fear, which is the way that I can talk about this both from a professional perspective as well as a very personal one. My degree is in journalism, and so way back when, as a young child, who's always been an avid reader, and a Curious George, as my nickname was as a child, and I have always wanted to write a book. And so the timing was right over the last year for me to step back from my consulting and put everything that I've learned on paper. and share it with other change leaders who find themselves in a situation that feels intimidating, overwhelming, full of uncertainty, volatility, all those things that are common in change.
What's one key behavior that leaders can make to effectively navigate fear and inspire their team?
One of the things that we can all do, whether as a leader or just as human beings, is related to the things we've already talked about, is that fear is human. And that same reaction that I'm having to something that's uncertain is likely happening in others. And so a lot of times it's just a matter of recognizing the humanity behind the employee, as the case may be, and really recognizing that if you take care of that human first, they're more often going to become a loyal employee or team member. I feel like the one thing that everyone can do, whether at positional sense of leadership or just in humans in general, is be respectful of the fact that fear is normal, fear is human. We all have it. Hold space for whatever that response or reaction might cause.
Yeah, that's great advice. So often we forget the human element in management and leadership. Recognizing fear as a valid and legitimate response to the situation is key. Kind of curious if there's any leadership books that have inspired you.
Yeah, great question. I'm a voracious reader, so I'm going to look over really quickly at my bookcase, which is full. A couple that played a strong influence in this book were the 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. So that one is really thinking about, like, am I in a place that's reactive or responsive? The same idea of like getting yourself out of an inherent human reaction into a more conscious response. So that's a big one for me. Another one that's more on the emotional side of it. Emotional intelligence is another one. But on the flip side, on the science side, I also have a strong respect for nudge behavioral economics. It's only about 10 years old, but virtually everything you're consuming today as a consumer is influenced by behavioral economics. Nudge is a great way of unpacking how humans make decisions. It's not rational, but it is predictable. Those are a couple of books that I would say if you want to do more reading and learn more about the combination of emotions and the impact on behavior, which is the essence of change. Those are a couple of great books to check out.
Awesome. So what's the biggest misconception that leaders face about being fearless or being a fearless leader?
Yeah, fearless is a myth.
Okay.
So literally the definition of courage is deciding that something else is more important than fear. A famous quote by FDR is that courage is not the absence of fear. It's deciding something else is more important. And that to me is really about, like, as a leader in organizational change, deciding that your humans, your people, are more important than whatever. You're afraid of looking foolish. You're afraid of not knowing the answer. You're afraid of stepping in front of a group with that kind of backdrop. And guess what? You got to decide to make the leap anyway and have those conversations, because in the process, you're going to establish a more authentic relationship with your team by showing vulnerability, by showing the behaviors that are about curiosity and figuring it out when you don't know, as well as that human connection of recognizing that all humans feel fear.
So how can people find your book?
We're interested in.
And learning more and reading about what we've been talking about on this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. It's available on Amazon, inspired by fear, becoming a courageous change leader. If you want to learn more about me, check out my website, krisjennings.com. Kris with a K, KJ.
Kris, I guess in conclusion, if listeners could just take one thing away from your book, what would that be?
We all have the potential for being courageous.
Love it. Thanks a lot, Kris. We really appreciate it. Very insightful. And I really hope the listeners will check your book out and get the opportunity to learn a lot about fear and dealing with it.
Thanks, guys. I've enjoyed the conversation. You're very curious. So brings a lot more joy to the conversation when people get past the uncertainty and into the fun stuff. So thank you.